Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Danya Sherman. I'm the Director of Public Programs for Friends of the Highline, and wanted to welcome you all to the third in our series of Rail Yards talks. If you are not already on our list and would like to hear about upcoming programs, we have a mailing list sign up out front. So I definitely encourage you. And just to tell you about a few programs that we have coming up, this Monday and Tuesday, October 10th and 11th, we have a fabulous program with two artists curated by Ballroom Marfa, which is an arts organization in Marfa, Texas. And they're going to be, it's Lale Koraminian, who is a filmmaker of sort of experimental films, and a musician named Shazad Ismaili, who are going to be doing a film screening and live accompaniment, and that's at 8 p.m. next Monday and Tuesday. And then next Friday, we have the last in our series of Trains on Film. We're showing Some Like It Hot at 7 p.m. here, and it should be a great time. Last Friday, we showed Strangers on a Train, and it's really nice to, in my opinion, sit outside and watch a great film. So I hope you can join us for some of those upcoming programs. Also wanted to thank all of you in the room who are supporters in many different ways. We have many volunteers here, many members. There are lots of ways to get involved with the Highline, and every bit helps. Friends of the Highline is the organization that maintains and operates the park on behalf of the city, and we're responsible for raising over 70% of the annual maintenance and operations costs. Thank you for all of the support that you can give. We also have a merchandise and membership table out front, and we are selling our newly published Highline book, which was written by Robert and our other co-founder, Joshua David, in their words. It's a great read. It's a juicy tell-all, so I would definitely encourage you all to pick up a copy. And if you do buy it directly from us, either here or on our website, those funds go even more directly to supporting the park than if you buy it through some other third party, so just something to keep in mind. And just wanted to let you know about our generous supporters for this Rail Yards Talks series. We have the Tiffany Co Foundation to thank, the New York City Community Trust, the LuEsther T Mertz Advised Funds, the Green Acre Foundation, and the New York State Council on the Arts. So without further ado, Robert Hammond is our co-founder. Friends of the Highline was founded in 1999, and he's going to tell you all about how we saved these sections of the Highline and how we hope to save and develop the third section of the Highline. And I've been working with Robert for 5 years, and every time he speaks, I learn something new. So I'm sure you all enjoy the talk. Please help me welcome Robert.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I know I see a lot of people some new people and some people that have been with us for a while, so thank you all. And Danya, a lot of y'all know Danya, but Danya runs all these programs we do. We've already had 300 this year, so she's the one that makes it all possible, but y'all are the ones that pay for it, so thank you. And one of the ways, I just wanted to give one more plug to the merchandise, because that was the number one question the gardeners were asked, is where can we buy your shirt? And so now we're selling them. So I highly recommend stopping by the merch cart. So Danya said she learned something new. It might not always be true. I'm not a historian, and as I'm not an architect or a city planner. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the history of the line. Take this with a grain of salt. Again, if you want to you can feel free to verify everything I say, because some of it might be wrong. So we're going to really focus on the Highline at the rail yard. So just to put it a little bit in perspective, it's the last third. So from Gansevoort to 20th was section 1, then up to 30th Street, right where that red line starts, is section 2. So it goes all the way around to 34th Street, and it represents about 30% of the Highline. Each section is about 30%, each one is about a half a mile. And this is what it looks like right now, and in some ways this is what we really fell in love with, is that natural wildscape. And I'm going to talk more about these photos, but I just sort of wanted to put it in perspective. And right now, it's a rail yard. It's the last sort of large undeveloped site in Manhattan. And this gives it a perspective. That's the West Side Highway. That's the Highline, right? Probably between 32nd and 33. And then, but what it really is it's a parking lot for trains. right now. Basically, when all the commuters come in from New Jersey and Long Island, they come in on the train, and the trains sit here. This is in the afternoon as the trains are going out. So in the morning it's empty, at noon it's full, and by now it's empty. And it's an incredible, important part of New York. New York, wouldn't really survive without this. And I'll talk a little bit about, what the future. But then just going back, into history, the trains originally ran on the street. This is a picture of 10th Avenue when it was called Death Avenue. I think most of y'all probably heard that story. And they hired guys on horseback to, run in front of the trains. But this picture sort of gives you an idea of how chaotic it must have been. And only one train company had a right. New York Central, that the Vanderbilts owned, was the only train that was allowed to run on the ground, into New York. Most of the trains came on these float barges from New Jersey. So the train goods from all over the country would come, get on this barge, come across the Hudson, and then come off into a network of warehouses. For example, remember the Tunnel nightclub that was in? The reason it was called the Tunnel, that building, and it's still there, it's the Terminal Stores warehouse. The trains used to run down the whole length of the building, and because the train cars would be unloaded and then run through the city. This is what it looked like before they built the High Line. And you can see how all these train lines they go into the water. So they were coming in and off the pier. You can see up at the top where that's one of the float bridges. Oh, I just wanted to, this is actually, they got one of these old float bridges, and now it's in Hudson River Park, I think in the upper 20s. This is an older picture now. It's the entrance to the Frying Pan. And there's some local activists in Community Board 4 that really made that happen, and it's sort of a great reminder, just as the High Line is part of the history, this is also, what was happening in these neighborhoods. So this is what it looked like before the High Line, and this was a plan for the High Line. It was finished in '34. I don't know when this plan was. We couldn't get a date on this, but you see what they did is they regularized it. And so the trains would come in, up from Manhattan and then loop around and then come on down. It was part of a larger program called the West Side Improvement Project. So it was elevated south of 36th Street. It used to run all the way down to basically almost Houston. That's Spring, Clarkson. And this building still exists. It's the St. John's Terminal Warehouse. So that building you go through if you go through Houston Street, you go through it, and if you look on the north facade, you can still see these squares where the trains used to go in. And then the High Line was demolished to Bank Street in the '60s, and then Bank to Gansevoort in the late '80s. The northern part from 36 to the '60s is a cut, so some of it goes. You can still see some of it. And then they built over it to create Riverside Park. So Riverside Park, the trains are actually below you. And then it ran all the way up to Spuyten Duyvil, the tip of Manhattan. And this was a Robert Moses project. It cost about $100 million in the 1930s, which is, hard to fathom how. And in The Power Broker, the great Robert Caro book, it talks about how he assembled all that money in the now it's several billion dollars. This is an aerial photo of the High Line being built. So you can still see they were still using the rail yards there, but the High Line came around. So just some photos of it being built. Someone found these forests at a yard sale. They were commissioned by the insurance company that was building it, and they commissioned sort of every section of it while it was being built. You sort of get an idea. The steel structure, there's the steel beams, and then there's basically, on top of this, they basically built a concrete bathtub. And that's all the steel beam, all this concrete is still right below us. There was only 2 blocks we had to replace in this whole, actually, the only part we had to replace was right below us. in this building in 1 block south, we think they used to wash rail cars and there was some kind of detergent and the concrete was eroded and we had to replace it. But everywhere else, we had to put in new drainage, but it's still the same concrete. And these pictures were in the 30s. It was finished in 34. And this is a picture of the post office building that's still there at the corner of 10th Avenue and 30th. And this is where all of our mail comes. This is where the anthrax letter went. All the mail comes in and out. All the stuff that was at the post office, the Farley building, across from Penn Station, all that's been moved into this building. And the mail used to come in and out by train. And here you can see them building that into the building. And this is a great photo. So this was taken after 7 years ago, but it's still basically the same. They've taken down that billboard, but you can still see those 3 bays at the corner of the building. That's where the High Line used to go in. You can see the tracks how they would go in that building. And this is what we call the spur, and we'll get back to it. But this is sort of the most contested part of the High Line at the rail yards. And so they called most of the goods that was brought in and out on the High Line were food. And it became nicknamed, it was Death Avenue. Then it became nicknamed the Lifeline of New York because it brought so much food in and out of New York. And it's also, interestingly, it was never called the High Line. It was called, much less exciting, the West Side Rail Viaduct or Elevated Rail Viaduct. And the High Line is a nickname, and we're not sure who first coined it, but it started coming around mainly we saw one reference in the 80s, but mainly in the 90s. So it's sort of a new moniker. I love this picture of the train. You can see the street sign, 11th Avenue and 30th Street. We don't have that many pictures of the trains actually up on it. And if you remember this, I'll show you in another picture the smokestack. It was still standing when we first went up there, but you could literally see it swaying in the wind. And so maybe they might have been smart. They took it down about 6 years ago. So the High Line was in use with the rise of interstate trucking. It was used less and less. The last train was a train of frozen turkeys at Thanksgiving. That's a fact that you could probably prove me wrong, but that's what they told me. So when they built the High Line used to go to 36th Street and loop around. When they were building the Javits Center comes all the way to 34th Street. So actually Jerry Nadler, who's now our congressman, I think he was a state senator at the time, he actually insisted that they rebuild this connection. So this little piece here from 33 to 34 is new. It was built, it was finished in 1980. And that's what kept the High Line as a working entity. I mean, it wasn't working, but it was technically a viable rail line. And if they didn't have that connection, they would have had to tear it down because it would have had no connection to the rail network. So it's just sort of a little important piece, and it's the only part of the High Line that's still there that's not, not the historic line. It's relatively new. The High Line then goes underground right here, and then there's you can see right there where that part of the line is still in use. If you take the Empire Line to Albany, you'll go through that cut. CSX, the current owner, actually leases it to Amtrak. So this is a great photo because this is right at this point where that picture is taken right here. You can almost see the green and the brown. That's where sort of the new constructed part for the Javits Center meets the old part. And so it's interesting when you're looking at this is what the High Line originally looked like. There was no dirt, there were no plants. It was all gravel. And 3 times a year, the railroad would spray it with incredible pesticides that kept it from looking like this. But after, gradually over time, this soil developed. And y'all might have heard from Rick Dark last week, some of the people that came, how all that, he can speak better about how that happened. But, And these are photos from Joel Sternfeld that he took over the course of, and he gave the first Rail Yards talk, I think 2 weeks ago. He came up in 2000 and 2001 and took these photos over the course of the year going through the full seasons. And I think we have, we just republished his book, Walking the High Line, with all these photos in it. There you can see the smokestack before it came down. And in the snow, it was just beautiful. And it's still, you know, this is where it looks so much like the High Line now, because the rails retain the heat. And so the snow melts right around, you know, the tracks, and they really become so visible. Stare Lehigh building. That's the old tunnel building. The lower one, not the tall one, but the really low one. That's the one where the trains would go all the way down the middle. And this is really the iconic photo. I mean, Josh and I called Joel the third co-founder, because it was in some ways this photo, I feel like, that sort of saved the High Line. This is taken right before 11th Avenue on 30th Street. You know, you can see the Empire State Building, you can see the Chrysler Building peeking out way over on the corner. And this is this great stretch down 30th Street. So people started thinking about when they actually built the rail yards, they built it with space between the tracks so you could actually build a platform over it. So when they built it, one of the reasons they had it go around it rather than through it was, even back in the 30s, they said someday Manhattan's going to need this space, and you're going to want to put a platform over it and build on it. This is a plan Virginia Fields came up with back when we were first starting, and she was one of our first supporters, and we were so excited that she included the High Line, because this is at a time where, I mean, I didn't really think the High Line would happen, so that she included it in her plan was a big leap of faith. But so, you know, interestingly, this is not that dissimilar from what's getting built. It's a lot more is being built, but this idea of a combination of, you know, park space and large-scale residential and commercial buildings. So you can see the Javits. You know, everyone knows the Javits Center is awful looking, and it doesn't even work as a convention center, and it's too small. They've always been trying to figure out how to fix it. The best plan I ever heard, it was called the Flip. And you would build the new Javits Center on top of the rail yards, or actually sort of around the rail yards, you know, connecting it in this sort of vein of the new post office, or, you know, what would be the new Penn Station, Madison Square Garden. And then you would sell the land that the Javits Center is on, put the street grid back in, and you'd have the more valuable land right near the water. Because right now, the Javits Center is not taking advantage of that great waterfront view. This was deemed just sort of too out there, and really never, we found this image, The Villager, God bless The Villager in El Amato, was one of the few papers that even sort of carried this story. But then the other thing that happened was, when Bloomberg came in office, he was a big proponent of the Olympics, bringing the Olympics to New York for 2012. Dan Doctoroff, the Deputy Mayor of Economic Development, who was a big advocate of the High Line, was the biggest proponent of the Olympics. And they needed to have an Olympic stadium. So they were looking for sites. So one of the sites that they came up with was the rail yards. And, you know, another slide I didn't put in here, this is also where at one time Mayor Giuliani, who was not a fan of the High Line, who tried to tear the High Line down, wanted to put the Yankee Stadium there. And there was such an uproar about them leaving the Bronx. And there was also a big uproar about the Jet Stadium. I'll go a little bit into that, but I also want to, so there was, they rezoned this area to make way for what would be a Jet Stadium and an Olympic Stadium. And then what they wanted to do is put a new boulevard down between 11th Avenue and 10th Avenue and rezone this for upscale it, upzone it for these big buildings for sort of Midtown West. And that actually happened. I I think I might have another slide. This is approved. Some of these things are going forward. The new 7 train, they finished building the tunnel. I talked to someone that went down there. It's going to open in 2014, the first new subway in 50 years. The entrance, so this is going to go over to Times Square up to 42nd Street. And that'll be at the corner of 34th and 11th Avenue. So how the city was going to get, because they couldn't afford to build the Olympic Stadium, so they were going to get the Jets, who wanted to move out of the Meadowlands. They were going to get the Jets to pay for it. And this is the plan that they proposed. They actually, it was very opposed by the community. A lot of people didn't like it. And they actually, to give them credit, they included part of the High Line. Again, that they were that was out there. It's one of the things that helped bring the city on board, was that the Jets liked the High Line. So I give them credit for that. But it was defeated basically, and it didn't go through. That's another rendering. It was going to be huge. This is an alternative plan that the RPA proposed. They said a better use. Don't put a stadium there. Stadiums aren't good for downtown, which seems to be true. Without, I'm not an expert, but so they proposed this idea similar to sort of the earlier one I showed you, of doing a mixed use. And the other thing that, I don't know, it's hard to get in the Jets stadium, but the Jets were going to cover over the West Side Highway. So this was the West Side Highway. They were going to build a park over the West Side Highway to connect this to the Hudson River. And that's what this plan said, is let's build a park over so you really connect this whole new neighborhood with the Hudson River. So then the city started thinking about what they were going to do. And they, most of the developers said, look, and the city said, okay, rather than come up with a plan, let's see what the developers think. And the developers said, you definitely need to tear down the High Line to make this work, because you can't build anything on the rail yards with the High Line there. So we started doing, our first public forum was back in 2006, way before we even opened this section. We were worried about what was going to happen. We were worried that the last part would be chopped off. So we did a study. We hired shop architects to help us think through all of the issues. And these slides are from a report that we did back in 2006. So the rail yards are owned by the MTA. So it's an interesting case where we as citizens, when they're selling the rail yards, we benefit. So it's a case where the city and the public agencies were making the courses, we want to get as much money for this so it can go into the subways. And these are some of what they said their goals were. They wanted to maximize the revenues. So that means really tall buildings and building on as much of the site as possible and making it as cheap to build. Because the more expensive it is to build, the less money the MTA gets. So we wanted to prove that the High Line would make it a more valuable site and that it wouldn't be more expensive. They said it would cost $100 million at one point. They said in added costs to build, with the High Line there. So we also, this is just again situating where it is. We made this point that it's an important part of the High Line. We also looked at Paris. Some of y'all know that the Promenade Plantée in Paris was one of our inspirations, and they made a similar mistake. Where the Bastille Opera House is now, the Place de Bastille, was the old train station, and the city developed the Promenade Plantée, but the federal French government developed the Bastille Opera House, and they were fighting, and so there's no connection. The Promenade Plantée comes along, it's this great 1.5-mile park, and then it ends right there in that wall. And then you have to walk down, and then you walk a block to go into the Opera House. And so we felt like that was an example where these two initiatives could have connected. We also made the case that it was just historic resource, and remember Penn Station. This is a picture of Penn Station being torn down. That we also said one of the things that their point was, it's so complicated to build this platform. And it is true. It's very complicated. They have to build this platform while they keep the rail yards open. They estimate it's going to cost $1 billion for each platform, so $2 billion. But what you have here is you do have 160 feet before the rail yards begin. So you have this ground floor land, which is cheaper to build on. So you don't need to tear the High Line down to get more. You have 160 feet, which is enough to build a building. Because one of the things they said is, if you tear the High Line down, you have more space. So that's what it actually looks like before you get between the High Line and the rail yards. This is sort of interesting. Also, you sort of see the difference in topography. That's sort of a view of the platform over the rail yards, and you see that it would be at the level of the High Line. So you'd have this sort of interesting condition where this new neighborhood would be at the High Line level. So the ground floor becomes the High Line floor. So it could be sort of an interesting dynamic there. We also just wanted to show that it would fit. You could fit all these buildings and parks and keep the High Line. This is one of the best corridors. This is, to me, my favorite view. You get this straight shot for 2 super blocks, with the Empire State Building. The other thing is, this is what it would look like if you built it without the High Line. You'd get this really narrow canyon. I mean, you're still going to get a canyon. It's just going to be less narrow. So that's an example of Fifth Avenue, and you can see how narrow. And with the High Line, it makes it a little more generous. It makes the buildings be set back. And this is just a rendering. This is not what's being built, but just to sort of give an idea of how it creates a little more space on the street. And this curve is actually also, anytime the High Line curves it creates these really interesting conditions. You get this great view, out over the river and into New Jersey. You get good sunsets there. That's a picture from above. This is just to show you how you could make a staircase that comes down the building next to it. And this is the part that they said, they said, okay, maybe we'll keep 30th Street, but this part along the West Side Highway has to come down because it's so near the tracks that there's no way we can get cranes onto the tracks to build the platform as long as the High Line is there. There you get another great view when it's all filled, with the trains. There's the sunset. So you can also see how close the trains come to the High Line. So, this was just a rendering of what we showed. We love the idea of a connection across the river. So this was just showing how the buildings could be set back and the High Line could be sort of this front porch. So then we had to show that it made sense from a construction standpoint. So we showed that there was enough room underneath to get all the cranes and equipment. Any equipment or cranes that come into New York have to get in the bridges, and the bridges have a less of a span than this. So anything that can get into Manhattan can get under the High Line. We also showed, we had construction experts show how you could actually build, buildings next to the High Line. You could even use the High Line potentially for cranes. By that time, the Caledonia had been going up, so it was actually an example of a building being built next to it. The other reason they said they wanted to tear it down is they wanted to put parking underneath it, which seemed like such a sad use. But and they said, okay, maybe we'll recreate the High Line. That was another concept, is that it'd be less expensive. Let us tear it down and rebuild it so we can put parking and stores underneath it. And so we dubbed that the faux line, which I always like that name. And, we showed you can still put stores underneath it. You can put parking underneath it. Another example where you could put the parking over to that side. This is the crane, showing how these cranes could fit and how you could actually, this is how they assemble. The crane comes in and they assemble it. And this shows how the sequencing would work of building the platforms. And then they became obsessed with the turn radius, because there are a lot of columns showing how you could put the turn in. Again, this is where they proposed tearing down the High Line, but they said it'll be better. It'll be a new High Line at the same level. And to us, if it's not the historic High Line, it's not the same. And we like the idea of this separate topography here, where the platform, the High Line starts sloping down. So on the West Side Highway, it's actually lower than the platform. So it gives you this, I think, interesting topography. After the Jets Stadium collapsed, the whole neighborhood was rezoned again, basically with this plan. This is what the MTA proposed, and this is what they sent in 2007. They sent this out to developers and asked developers basically, what would you build here based on this plan, and how much money would you give us, the MTA? And they showed the High Line here. Basically, they said, you can keep the High Line or you can get rid of the High Line. Let us know what you think. And these are the different designs that came back. This was from Tishman Speyer. They actually showed almost all the High Line, but they showed getting rid of the High Line here, what we call the spur. And this is actually this development plan 1 originally. But then after they withdrew their bid, after the economy started going down, Helmut Jahn was the architect. Not a very good looking plan, from my opinion. This was the related companies. They partnered with KPF, Robert Sturm, and Architectonica. They showed the entire High Line there. They actually got the bid. They took it after Tishman Speyer dropped out. Then Vornado, they kept a little part here, but then what they said is we're going to build a new High Line in the middle. And it was called, I think, the Skyline. And you can see it sort of swooping around there. That was the one that this was the thing that infuriated me the most, but the new High Lines. And this was, I think, the best looking and most interesting. It was in some ways, it was the most radical. He was, and it was by Extel with Stephen Hall was the architect. Stephen Hall also was the first person that ever really looked at the High Line. He did a project for it in 1980 called the Bridge of Houses. And his offices are actually in this building right here where that arrow is, so he overlooks this. And he said, let's keep the whole center free and public open space. And instead of building an expensive platform, it was almost like a suspension bridge. So you're moving all the buildings to the side and creating this less expensive suspension bridge. Some people said it wouldn't work. He said it would save a lot more money. I think it was a really interesting plan. The buildings were, and you got to get used to all these buildings are tall, so you have to get past that. But I think his buildings were very interesting. And here you got that idea, and he would have this water, all the water that was collected off the buildings would come down, and that was like a waterfall right on the West Side Highway. It's, to me, sort of romantic. Another group that disregarded the MTA's guidelines was Brookfield, and they had this huge team with our designers, field operations, and Dillers, Caffidio, and Renfro. And what they did is they said the High Line's the best part about this. And they actually kept it free. So they moved the buildings north, so you would have the High Line completely free and open all along 30th Street. And they had a waterfall too. Seems to be popular. So when Related when they won the bid, they said, okay, we love the High Line, but we love it all but the spur. So, and the spur is that part up at the top, where it goes over 10th Avenue, where it went into the post office building. So we started, and a lot of y'all, I know some of y'all came to these hearings. This is a picture of a rally where we got half the room was wearing these red shirts and really showing, this was back in 2008, to really put pressure, on everybody that we wanted to keep the whole spur. This is Related's new plans for the High Line, for the whole rail yards. it's a big development. I mean, all of these plans have about the same amount. It's 11 million square feet of development. So that's downtown Seattle times 2, in this site. To give you a scale, these are 80 and 90-story buildings. So they can look deceptive in that photo. So, for us, it's always also more reason to keep the High Line. It's the only sort of historic piece that's going to be in this neighborhood that's all brand new. So that's where we are right now, is we're in discussions. This is a plan. So we're still talking about the spur. They want a cantilever over the High Line here and here. And you can see these plans are on their website if you go to the related companies. It's called the Hudson Yards. That's what they're calling about. There's also a big open space network in the middle. And they have to devote this to a cultural facility in all the plans. That was part of the deal. And so it's not sure what that would be or who would take that, but that would also be part of it. So people keep asking why we've been working on this so long, why don't you have a deal? And I'm feeling more optimistic than I have been in a while, but it's a very complicated site to get. So just to give you a picture of all the different parties we have to deal with. So up at the top that says 3334, that's owned by the Javits Center or the Empire State Development Corporation. So we have to negotiate with them. The MTA and Related. MTA owns the land, but Related has bought it from them. And we have to negotiate with the railroad. So these green parts, and all this part we're on, was donated by CSX to the city. But the rest of it around the rail yards is still owned by the railroad. So we also have to negotiate with the railroad. And we have to negotiate with the city because that's who CSX would transfer to it. So when we're having these conversations, it's with a lot of lawyers. I'm not exaggerating when we have these meetings. It's about this many people, and all different, very high-paid, expensive lawyers. Luckily, ours is pro bono. But and this is just sort of a little summary of the different sort of path that we're going through. We had to go through a ULURP, which is a Unified Land Review process, that went through City Council last year that gave the city the right to acquire it. And the next step will be trying to negotiate an acquisition, then design and construction. So, in some ways, this is an image from the very first design competition. So in some ways on the rail yards, we're back, in 2007. Once we get an acquisition, we still have to design it. And, one of the first things we'll do like we did before, is start, a community input process on that piece. So in some ways it's exciting because there's a whole another third of the High Line yet to be designed. And so, we might need to call y'all out for help again. We don't know how. Right now we're feeling optimistic, but things go up and down. So you might be getting emails from us asking, to come out for different kinds of hearings. And then hopefully you'll be getting an email from us saying we have an agreement and we need to start talking about how we're going to design it and pay for it. We also need to raise the money to build this last section. As Danya said, we, Friends of the High Line, pay for almost all of the cost of all the gardeners and maintenance workers you see up here are paid for us. The city pays for the security, the PEP. But on the construction, the city paid for more than half of the construction, and we raised a smaller percentage. On the rail yards, it's likely we're going to pay for the majority because the city in this financial state doesn't have a lot of money to contribute to it. So that's where I think I'll end on. There you can see that smokestack again. And, we have a little bit of extra time, so I can answer a few questions if anybody has anything. What? Okay. Yeah, or just raise your hand and speak out. Yeah. Not on the acquisition. No, first we have to have a deal before the city can acquire it. So right now there's no hearing. Really, it's this negotiation. I don't even know how many way negotiation. Javits, MTA, Related, City, CSX, and us. So a 6-way negotiation. Yep.
Can you give us an update on the 18th Street Plaza?
Great, good question. So, as part of the rezoning of West Chelsea, there's right now where we have a great art project up right now. There's a parking lot at 18th Street. It's called the Edison parking lot. It's a full block, and you see that billboard up there that it's a Darren Allman photograph. There was actually a Joel photograph this summer. It's of this mountain scape. So to the west of the High Line, that's going to be developed. There's going to be 2 large buildings that were built as of right, or they're going to be built as of right by the owner of that property. But as part of the rezoning, they have to give the part to the east of the High Line. It's sort of like a pizza-shaped slice. If you're standing on the High Line looking at the billboard, all the part from the street to the High Line is going to be a public plaza. But they don't have to give that to the city until they decide to develop their building. So I think in this, they also have to remediate that site. That parking lot was a coal-fired gas plant, and it's heavily toxic. They have to go down all the way to bedrock to remediate it. So I think that the good news is those buildings are a long way off. The bad news is our plaza is a long way off. And in some ways it's good. It's not, we were originally thinking having this grand stair that come down there. If you look at our design book that's for sale there, you can see the design for it. It was this giant stair. And now I think we might design it differently because we were worried not enough people were going to come to the High Line. Which, at the time, just to give you a perspective, we thought 300,000 people would come a year. And, this summer we had 300,000 people in 2 weeks. So, now that's not our worry. Our worry is actually just more space. And I think my thought is more green space on the street. That's what 10th Avenue could maybe use. So I think there was a question right here.
Can you just, Robert, tell us your personal story, how you got involved?
Yeah. So I live on 10th and Washington. I moved there when I graduated from college, and people say, oh, you must be so smart from the High Line, because you helped do this. And I was like, well, if I was really smart, I would have bought an apartment near the High Line. But I am in a rental apartment in the village. And I read an article in '99 that it was going to be torn down, and it had a map of the High Line. That was the first time I saw that the whole thing was continuous, and I assumed someone would be working to preserve it, and I could help out. And called around, and no one was doing anything. So I heard it was on the agenda of a community board meeting, CB4, and I went. I'd never wanted to go to a community board meeting, but went to this one in August of '99 and sat next to another guy who I didn't know who lived in Chelsea, and we were the only 2 people interested in everyone else either wanted to tear it down or didn't care. So we exchanged business cards and decided to start something together. And that's Joshua. And neither of us had any background. I was in internet startups and a part-time painter, and he was a travel writer. So we also just didn't think, we really would have the experience or the money or anything to get this done. And if you want to know more, thank you, is a great lead-in. This is the book. Is just out next week, but we have copies here. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. You can pre-order it, but if you buy it, I have to say it is cheaper on Amazon. So if you're looking for a bargain, it's cheaper. But all the extra proceeds come to us. Not the Friends of the High Line, not me. Josh and I wrote it. Half of it is a story of how we sort of did this between '99 and 2009 when we opened section, and the other half is photos. And all proceeds, royalties go to Friends of the High Line.
I might have missed you saying this. Is there an official approved plan for building on top of the rail yards right now, or is that still in discussion?
Yes, it is approved. No, they can build as of right. I mean, they can build, this plan is as of right. It went through the city council back in, I think, 2006, and so they can basically do, in some ways whatever they want. Now, they don't own the High Line, that's the key. So maybe right now, CSX owns this. So they can't tear it down right now. So that's the good news. But we want to make sure that this deal gets done before we get a new administration that might be willing to look at alterations or tearing part of it down, or, I think my biggest fear is the faux line fear. Is tearing down part of it or rebuilding it is improved and better. So yeah, this development plan does not need really right now any more new city approvals. Any other questions? Great, yeah. Yeah, and we've already started talking to them about like what they, this, and I highly recommend, it's actually in the design book. What's so great about and the design team is James Corner Field Operations, and what's so important is they're the lead. Most people, and they partnered with Dillish, Scafidio, and Renfro, the architects, but the lead was a landscape architect. And when we first started doing our design competition, we were open to an architect. And now if I was doing it over, I'd say it has to be, this is a landscape project. And luckily, our architects sort of appreciate that. Rick Scafidio said his job is to save the High Line from architecture. Because I think that's what a lot of people were thinking about was building on, using the High Line as an excuse to build buildings, where really it's a landscape and you can sort of, the architecture is exposing it, sort of like the cutout at 30th Street where you can see the steel beams, or the 10th Avenue Square where you go in it. And so, they've actually been going back to their original design entry and sort of thinking about what other, and that's why I think Section 2 has been so successful. It feels like Section 1, but it's different. There's different sort of spaces, or they call them rooms, and sort of concepts. And so they're starting to think about what would they do, but they would definitely be, the designers. Yeah. Yeah, so he asked, why hasn't the platform started construction? Because it costs $1 billion. And so they, they're, and the reason, if you go to their website, what they're doing, they're looking for tenants. So the website's not for you and I. They're looking for large businesses that want to take up, office space in here. And when they get enough of those people, they'll build the platform. They can build some of the, remember when I talked about some of it was on the ground? So that's probably where they'll start building first. But these are big buildings, and so that's what they're out there doing right now, is trying to get tenants. And as soon as they have enough tenants, they'll build it gradually. But they need enough to trigger, so they're willing to spend. They also have to pay, I don't know what the exact number, but over a time period, it's something like $1 billion to the MTA. So, and that gets triggered over a certain time period. So last question, yep?
Is this rentable event space? Is there options for revenue generating?
On the rail yards? Oh, on the High Line? Yeah, it's a tricky issue for us because we need to make money, but we also always want it to be really a public space. So there's certain places, we always want to keep the path open. So, occasionally we have closed this for private events for one day. We're also looking to we just got this great projector, is new. A donor donated this to us. So we're looking to do more events, in this space for free. Also, we want to do. We're testing the Some Like It Hot sort of movies to see if that's something we want to make a regular part. of the space. The other thing we want to expand, that we started expanding, is food. I mean, one, because it's a way to make more revenue. It's never going to pay for the whole High Line, but it's also the biggest request we got was they wanted to get something to eat, something to drink. So you could see we tested different cart vendors in Chelsea Market this summer. We also tested the #1 ticketed offense. We've had no crimes committed on the High Line, but people get tickets, and they get tickets for booze, which is illegal in an open space, even when you have it in the plastic bag or the paper bag. So we experimented with it. We have something called the porch, where it's 30 seats where you can get beer and wine, and that's been pretty successful. We wanted to see how that worked, and it's worked well. You can go get a drink there, but you can't leave with it. And so I think we're also thinking about this space in these corners is owned by this private developer that bought this, but we're thinking about maybe we want to expand the High Line into those spaces or be doing some kind of programming there. So those are the kind of things that we're thinking about coming up. Okay. Oh, one last. Okay.
Just taking the High Line further, there's been a recent article about the low line bridge.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that idea of just doing the ground? But also, as much as you know before the low line, how do you see this working in other cities? Has there been any thoughts to, you mentioned Paris?
Yeah, so 2 questions. One, he asked about other examples, and there was a New York Magazine article, and I think the New York One did a piece on something called the Low Line, or the Delancey Underground. It's around Delancey Street and where the Williamsburg Bridge. It's an old trolley station underground, and it's huge. It's 2 acres. Hasn't been used since, I don't know when it was, like the 30s or something. The MTA owns it. And these 2 guys, I had lunch with one of them today, want to turn it into it's actually using, and I'm going to get it wrong, but these things that sort of suck sun down into it so it'd all be naturally lit. If you look on New York Magazine Low Line, light tubes. And so there's a parking lot above it. And so you would just have these poles that take light down, and so it's this sort of underground park. I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea. They got a lot, they're just starting it. And then the other question was, what about other examples of elevated rail lines in other cities? I mean, it's something we can right now. They're starting to think about doing that in Philadelphia. Paul, what's the website for your group? viaductgreen.org, and it's exactly that. It's a great space that runs, it's actually longer than the High Line, runs through great parts of Philadelphia. It could be a really great connector. You can also be a friend on Facebook. I'm a Viaduct Green Facebook fan. They have some in Jersey City. Atlanta has the Beltline. So there's a lot of great examples. One thing I'm cautious of, we also have a lot of developers coming to us saying, we're going to build an elevated walkway. And that was one of the criticisms that we got. Elevated walkways have not worked traditionally because mainly they're just sort of connecting commercial buildings. And I think why the High Line works is it's a park. And its main use is not getting people from A to B. It's as an escape from the city. It's not to get you, off the street and avoid the city, or to escape, like the elevated walkways in Newark to make, people feel safer. It's a park. And so that's why I think it's the projects that are approaching it that way, which Paul's doing, and the one in Chicago, Bloomingdale Trail, where they're thinking of it as open space, not as real estate connectors. Because then I think that's where it gets a little dangerous, and it might not always work. So I'll be here for a few more minutes if anybody has any other questions. But thank you all for coming.